Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you're doing well. You, your family, your team, everyone around you. Today, I want to talk about asking more questions, asking powerful questions, kind of on two fronts. I was at an event over the weekend for the National Speakers Association, which was great. Always great to be around some of my colleagues and some really inspiring people. And I met actually a new friend at this event named Chad Littlefield. And Chad wrote a book called Ask Powerful Questions several years ago and has been focused on connection and engagement in his work. And I really enjoyed meeting him personally, but he got up and spoke to us and facilitated a really simple but profound exercise in which he had us just ask some questions of each other. They were on these cards that he's created, and it was questions like, "What brings you joy?" or "How have things changed over the last 10 years of your life?" or "If you could fix one problem in the world, what would it be?" I mean, they're sort of like icebreaker type questions or get to know you type questions, but given my interest in and passion about authenticity and authentic connection, of course, I loved it. But a couple things that Chad said that got me thinking this weekend, and then some other things that sort of struck me that I want to talk about is in terms of interpersonal relationships, in terms of connecting with other people, whether it's people we're meeting newly, whether it's people on our teams, whether it's people in our families, whether it's people we're wanting to do business with or networking with at an event. And I know we do less of that these days than we used to, or it's at a party, at a social gathering. You know, Chad was using this example that, we often, what's the first question that we tend to ask? Where are you from when you meet someone who you don't know? And, or what do you do? Those types of questions. And not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but if I meet someone and I say, "Where are you from?" and they say, "Oh, I'm from, Lansing, Michigan, or Columbus, Ohio, or Tallahassee, Florida." Often, because I've traveled around a lot over the years playing baseball and now, 25 years of speaking, I will often have some story or some connection to that place. "Oh, I love, you know, Lansing, Michigan. I played baseball for the Lansing Lugnuts," right? Again, that's me. And I'm an extrovert and I like to talk to people. But immediately, if I do that, if I say, "Where are you from?" and you say Lansing, Michigan, and then I tell you about playing for the Lansing Lugnuts in 1996, which I did, which could be some common ground between us, what am I now doing? I'm talking about myself. "Oh, I've been there. I really like it there," right? Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but what if I asked another question, right? "How did you like growing up in Lansing, Michigan?" Or "Tell me about your favorite school teacher." Or I don't know, just some other type of question or following up on what people say. I was at an event a year or so ago, and one of the other speakers was talking about connection questions and going deeper, kind of like what Chad was talking about. But he said, he was talking to managers about connecting with employees. And instead of just asking, "How's it going? How are you doing? What's going, hey, scale of 1 to 10, how are things right now?" Right? And if someone says 8 or 9, whoa, wow, great. What's making it an 8 or a 9? If someone says 2 or 3, oh, what's going on? That leads to a follow-up question that goes much deeper. And when this speaker was sharing this at the Work Human conference last year, I remember thinking, wow, that's great. And he actually even used the example that he had teenage kids, just like we do, and that he would often ask that instead of, "How was school?" "Fine." "Hey, scale of 1 to 10, how was school today?" "2." "Really? What made it a 2?" And then we go deeper. So the second question, the follow-up question, the third question, the fourth question, not to interrogate people, which by the way, some of us, myself included, have a tendency to do, but what if we could follow up a question with another question and then another question, just to kind of go deeper into when we're asking questions, we're no longer focused on ourselves, we're focused on the other person. We're curious about who they are, what they think, how they feel, right? There's a lot of conversation these days about what's going on in the economy, what's going on politically, socially, right? And people have lots of opinions. And let's just say you're feeling scared about what's going on. What's making you scared? Right? Let's say you're feeling excited about what's going on. Oh, what's having you feel excited, right? And then talking about that and really getting into other people's worlds, being curious about their experience. Chad said something. He was talking to most of us who are, speakers and coaches and facilitators and people who lead groups, right? So in that context, he said one of his favorite questions to ask in response to an experience, right? Like a debrief type question is what struck you? What struck you from that experience? What did you notice, right? What came up for you? Those are the type of questions sometimes I find myself asking when I'm debriefing with a group or like, what struck you? What did you notice? What came up for you? What insight, awareness did you have? Like those types of questions, because then we're again curious with other people and in life, in our relationships, even the people that we know and love the most, that we see all the time, that we interact with, right? We're often asking very logistical questions. What's for dinner? Or what time are you getting home? Or what do you need me to do? Or where are the kids? Or, whatever, right? And again, those are the types of questions that we need to often ask just to make the logistics of life work. But, I really like asking questions. What are you grateful for? What are you excited about? What's most stressful and concerning right now? But not, to freak people out, but just to get into a conversation where we're actually talking about what's real. So questions can lead us to deeper and more authentic conversations and connections. And yeah, it can seem weird. And sometimes we might ask a question and someone might not want to answer, or it's a little too personal, or it's a little pushy, or whatever. But if we trust ourselves and use our emotional intelligence and use our intuition, that can be a really powerful thing for us to do if we want to connect more deeply, especially these days when life's moving 100 miles an hour. We're texting, we're slacking, we're emailing, we're not always communicating in real time. And even when we are communicating in real time, it's on FaceTime, it's on Zoom, it's on Teams. We're not face to face with each other. But even if we are, people are on their phones, people are distracted, people are doing things, asking questions. I learned this years ago speaking that when I ask a question of the audience, it interrupts what they're thinking about, not as a manipulation, but it stops them from what they're thinking about and has them, if it's a decent question, has them stop, ponder, pause, and respond, even if it's just in their own mind, or maybe verbally, maybe with raising their hand or something. And again, not trying to do just sort of cheesy speaker or group facilitation things, but there is power in the asking of questions. And if we can bring that into how we lead, how we parent, how we human, how we interact with other humans, it can really make a difference for us so that we're not so focused on ourselves or always trying to have the right answer, but also in terms of really having people feel seen and heard and letting our curiosity lead the way. So that's the second thing though that I want to talk about because look, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now and in the country. And depending on when you're watching this or listening to this episode, who knows what will be happening. But right now, as I'm recording this in, mid-March of 2025, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot going on with respect to the economy and, government and tariffs and the stock market and things like that. And there's just a lot of chaos, uncertainty, unease that I'm personally experiencing, and I think a lot of people are. And look, we're also right up on the fifth anniversary of when COVID really took over life here in the U.S. I mean, it was obviously started in China in 2019 and was sort of moving its way around Asia and then into Europe and eventually got to the U.S. in mid-March of 2020. And so I've been reflecting a lot on just everything we've been through the last 5 years, but also just thinking about the times we find ourselves in right now. And I went to this conference, I was on the road speaking at some events in Atlanta and Indianapolis and also in Orlando, but the conference was down in Orlando. So I was on the road for about 8 days. And it was an interesting trip, but being at these conferences like the National Speakers Association, we do a lot of masterminding. There's a lot of discussion about the business and where you're at and what are you doing and what are your goals? And, I mean, and I love that stuff. I'm super grateful for the colleagues that I have and people that I know, and the different communities that I'm connected with and people that I get to, work with and mastermind with and support and all of it. But oftentimes I find myself searching for answers. What's the answer? What's the answer? I can't solve this problem. And that makes sense. We all are trying to do that, I think, in life personally as well as professionally. But I had a thought this morning as I was out on a run, and I was thinking maybe it's more about asking questions than it is about finding answers, especially at a time like this, especially when there's so much uncertainty. What's the question, or what are the questions I want to be engaged in? What are the inquiries? Years ago when I got trained as a coach, we talked about the power of inquiry, and they would often say, like, leave your clients with an inquiry at the end of a session, something for them to ponder, to think about, to reflect on, not to solve necessarily, but just to be thinking about. And I think a lot of times, I know this is true for me, and maybe it's true for you. I'm so obsessed with solving problems or fixing things or accomplishing things or getting to the, solution or the answer of things. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with that by nature, but I think sometimes once we get the answer to something, our brain shuts off. Once we get the answer to something, we stop inquiring into it a lot of times. Right. And with, Google and ChatGPT and, our phones in our pockets, like we're constant. I don't know if you're this way, but I'm constantly looking stuff up. Not that that's bad, but it's like, remember back in the day, 10, 20, 30 years ago, before we could look everything up instantaneously, we had to just think about it. We had to wonder, we had to discuss and even debate it a little bit with the people around us. We didn't just immediately look, and not that everything that's on the internet is accurate, right? So then we don't even know. It's, oh, I saw it on Wikipedia, but that may not even necessarily be true. But the point is, like, I think it would benefit all of us to just sit in some questions and ponder them. What brings you joy? What are you grateful for? Right? Where might there be avenues or solutions or ideas or opportunities that exist right now, even in the midst of some of the chaos and the challenge and the fear that's out there? Right? One of the questions that I heard Mel Robbins say a while back that I shared on the podcast here that I really like is, what if it all works out? What if it goes well? Instead of being afraid that it won't, right? And for me, as someone who tends to worry about things and get stressed about things and think about all the ways it could potentially go wrong, what if we ask different questions? I heard Michael Beckwith years ago say, what's good here that I'm currently not seeing? And again, not to sugarcoat or minimize stuff, but I do think it's easy to get caught in the swirl and the fear and the panic of things and trying to grasp for answers, grasp for certainty, when in reality, look, clearly there's times in life, individually and collectively, when there's more uncertainty, there's more chaos, there's more disruption. We seem to be in a pretty significant time of chaos and disruption right now, and have been for quite some time. It's ebbed and flowed, but these last 5 years, and even the 5 years before that, a lot was happening and continues to happen, right? Right now, we're in a moment where there seems to be a lot of things that are moving and shaking and changing, and we're not really sure where it's going to settle or if it's going to settle. And that, for me personally, is pretty uncomfortable. I don't necessarily love it. And as I often say here, the great quote from Byron Katie, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. So what if we embraced the moment that we're in, whatever moment that may be? Again, you may be listening to or watching this months or years out in the future, but I imagine there's some level of chaos or uncertainty happening whenever you happen to be watching this or listening to this. But what if we could just embrace the moment and challenge ourselves to ask different questions, right? Why is this happening for me, not to me? What are the opportunities here that maybe I'm not seeing? Who could I ask for help? What could I learn from this? How might this benefit me? How could this be fun? What would make this easy? I mean, I'm just rattling off questions, right? What if I was fully ready for the moment that I'm in? What if I could trust myself? There's so many different questions that we can ask. And just like what Chad was teaching us over the weekend about asking those powerful questions in conversation with another human instead of turning it back on us or espousing our wisdom or our ideas or our experience. Not that we can't ever do that, but what if we just kept asking questions to see where we got? in the discussion with the other person, in our life, in our work. How might that change the way you think about things? So here's my invitation to you. A couple things that we can do with respect to this. First and foremost, start paying attention to how you interact with others. See if you can ask more questions, more authentic questions, more follow-up questions. Again, not as an interrogation or an interview per se, but just to get to an even deeper level of connection with the person. Connection before content, as Chad was saying a lot. Connection before correction if we're coaching someone, whether it's an employee, whether it's a child, right? Michelle says to me all the time about our now 19 and 16-year-old daughters, connect before you correct. And I've definitely been guilty of not doing that, just jumping into the correction mode. But the questions can lead to deeper connection. So that's the first thing, paying more attention to how we're interacting with other human beings, seeing if we can ask more thoughtful, more authentic questions, and then follow up a question with another question to go deeper into that discussion. Secondly, what questions could we start asking with respect to our life, with respect to some of the big decisions we have to make, some of the areas where it feels important for us to perform or to solve problems or whatever? Not that we aren't interested in solving the problem or figuring things out or producing the results that we want to produce, but instead of being so obsessed with that all the time, what if we could challenge ourselves to just hang out in some different questions, ask some more open-ended, inspiring questions that might lead to different results or at least different insights? How could this be more fun? How could this be easier? How could this be inspiring? What could we do to make this the most effective it could be? How could this have even more impact? Those types of questions. The quality of our relationships, the quality of our communication, the quality of our ideas often stems, at least in part, from the questions that we ask, not the answers that we give or the advice or the brilliance or whatever. So let's see if we can ask more questions, more powerful questions, and really embrace the curiosity of inquiry, especially given the nature of what's going on right now. I don't know that there are a lot of, hard and fast answers right now to things, but there's definitely a lot of questions that we can ask. And I want to hang out in some big, exciting, inspiring questions and see what comes from that. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As always, I appreciate it, whether this is the very first time or you've listened to all 400 and now 401 episodes of this podcast. Feel free to check out the show notes or the links below if you want to connect with me on social media or learn more about my work. Best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. And we always love it. If you haven't already followed or subscribed to the show, make sure to do that. We also love it when you leave a rating or a review or share episodes with other people. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work and to life. And remember, we're all in this thing together.